The United Nations General Assembly gathered this week in New York City, and yesterday's schedule included a heads of state summit on pandemic preparedness. That alone should cause alarm bells to go off. Well, in that, the World Health Organization, the WHO, orchestrated a vote of the General Assembly on a non-binding declaration that appears to have been designed to build momentum for the WHO's global power grab that they have planned in May, when they want to adopt a universally binding treaty that would make them the global pandemic police in effect. Joining me now to discuss this, Michelle Bachmann. She served in Congress for 8 years and is now the Dean of the Robertson School of Government at Regent University. During her time in Congress, she served on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and she's been tracking the WHO and this pandemic treaty from the start. Dean Bachmann, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Tony, great to be with you today on this important topic.
Yeah, no news. I mean, there was no news. The only thing you could see on this were press releases from the United Nations and others who are supporting this. Give us the latest on what took place tomorrow and how this kind of fits into their plan of this for this global power grab.
Right. Well, the timetable was set out in May of this year that at this assembly this week, there would be a historic first time ever summit on global pandemic preparedness. And that summit was yesterday. And so the plan, the pre-baked plan, is that a resolution would be passed by all of the 194 member nations. The only thing is the UN encountered a major problem because on Sunday, September 17th, 11 nations wrote a letter, a formal letter saying that they would not go along with this resolution that was intended to be passed this week. The resolution was brought up early on Wednesday at the beginning of this summit. However, it didn't actually get a vote. The president of the UN for this week issued a press release that said that we've passed this resolution. It wasn't passed. They issued the resolution. And so these 11 nations that objected stopped the process from going forward. And so now the General Assembly of the UN would have to come back and actually take a vote. If there are member nations who object, then the resolution can't go forward. This is absolutely historic. International law professor Dr. Francis Boyle said that this was a historic fail for the globalists at the UN yesterday. This is actually a victory for those who've been tracking this issue, but we need to know that the globalists are loaded for bear and they plan to have the global pandemic treaty and the international health rules changed in less than 1 year, next May in Geneva, Switzerland. So we have to stay on top of this. But yesterday was good news as far as I'm concerned. It's the first time we've seen nations object formally, and they objected in a written letter that was directed to the President of the United Nations. And so that's on paper, it's written, and these resolutions go into force and effect. If no one objects, they go into force and effect. But 11 nations objected. So that was a huge win, and I'm extremely grateful for what happened.
But to have greater effect, they're going to have to oppose what takes place in May when they're actually voting on the treaty, will they not?
Well, what they did was in writing, and that's very important. These 11 nations signed their nation's name. They're in writing. They objected. They objected in a letter, and that has a high force and effect. But again, we're going to have to see nations object to the final document that will be presented. This was just a resolution, Tony. That's right. What all this was. It was a terrible resolution. It called for handing over national sovereignty of all nations to the United Nations on a plethora of topics. So this is not something we want to do. But this was just meant to be a PR win. And the UN didn't get the PR win.
they've made this process very complicated in terms of the multiple, meetings and pronouncements, and it's very difficult for people to track because there's really two things moving here at one time. But as you said, this was more of I think orchestrating a PR event that went bad for them yesterday.
Yeah, it went badly. They were caught with egg on their faces because they tried to pretend that all nations went on along with this resolution when in fact they didn't. What they did is they drew out the dissenters. That had never happened before. When I was in Geneva, Switzerland in May at the Global World Health Assembly, no nation registered their dissent formally. They didn't register dissent on Twitter, anywhere. So it appeared that all nations were going along with this. That's exactly what the UN wanted. They wanted to present a unified face yesterday. They didn't get it. They got a smackdown when they got this letter on Sunday, September 17th, saying, we, the 11 aforementioned countries below, do not agree to this. We don't like the way you're negotiating this thing. And they laid out 4 criteria that they objected to. So at this point, the UN has a problem in their hands because they have dissenters in the ranks. This is good. Now I invite more nations to wake up. I invite our congressmen, our United States senators to wake up. We now have paper, we have words on paper that tell us what the Biden administration is pushing. And they're pushing nothing less than transferring national decision-making authority, national sovereignty over healthcare decisions and more away from the United States, away from the Congress, quite frankly, away from President Biden, quite frankly, and handing it over to the United Nations. It doesn't get bigger than this. So people need to call their representatives. They need to call their United States senators and say, wake up, look at what's happening at the United Nations. We don't want what President Biden is pushing. We don't want to give up national sovereignty over declaring a national emergency over pandemics to the UN. That'd be the worst thing that we could possibly do. So people need to act now.
This is really unprecedented in even the United Nations. They've never, they've basically been an advisory body that has, gotten in the way. But this would literally give them the power to declare a global emergency based upon a pandemic. And what they've done along the way, and you've been tracking this, is they've rolled everything into it. They added reproductive health care, climate. Any number of things could trigger what they call a global crisis, giving them the power to tell member states what to do.
Well, you're right, Tony, because it's a bait and switch like the UN usually does. But what they're saying is, oh, this is all about giving us power to have power over the pandemics. Well, that would be worse than bad enough because the WHO was wrong at every turn on the last pandemic. Why would we give them more power? But it's worse than that. It's exactly what you said. It would include if they don't like the way a country is dealing with LGBT issues or abortion or poverty or climate change, they could weigh in. But it's even worse than that. They included more population control, what they call One Health. If they think that maybe a snail darter isn't being treated right, then they could declare power over that nation. In other words, Tony, this document is trying to pretend that it's dealing with the pandemics. It's actually a subterfuge for global government. So people have got to wake up. Congress has got to wake up. This will create, for the first time in history, global government, real power at the UN. And we've got to oppose it. And we've got to oppose it quickly. We can't wait till May. We've got to oppose it now.
This is like right out of Revelation.
Yes, that's right. It is. It is. God has told us what was coming. We are living in the last days, and we have an opportunity to oppose this. So we've got to melt the phone lines in Washington, D.C. now. Yeah.
All right. We're on it. Michelle Bachmann, always great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tony. Bye-bye.